Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Noongar people as the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we are meeting today, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Tonight will run for just over an hour. We do have time for questions and answers, so please save your questions for the end of the session. You're here tonight to listen to Neville Passmore and Sue McDougall, who will be talking to us about the challenges facing the city's urban forest and the benefits an urban forest provides. Armidale is one of the fastest growing areas in Perth, but with urban sprawl comes a lot of tree canopy loss and a greater need to plant and maintain trees in our neighbourhoods. This is what we refer to as our urban forest strategy. An urban forest is made up of all the trees in our city's streets, private gardens, parks and public reserves. In government speak, we refer to this as our tree canopy. Well, that's about enough from me in my introduction. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Neville Passmore and Sue McDougall. Neville has nearly 50 years experience in the gardening industry. He's a passionate horticulturalist, and through his involvement with Green Space Alliance, he's advocating to bring living greenery back to our suburbs and cities in WA. Neville is undeniably one of WA's most recognised gardening personalities, and I'm thrilled to have him online tonight. Sue McDougall is a qualified horticulturalist and landscape architect with more than 35 years industry experience. She is well known across Perth for sharing her gardening expertise in print media, and I'm sure you've heard her on radio and seen her on TV. Sue is a director of the Botanic Gardens and Parks Authority. I'm sure you're all dying to hear what they have to say, and so I invite Neville and Sue to share their presentation with you now. And I hope you can all see Sue on the side there. Sue McDougall with their greenery behind her.
I know, that's why I've got these amazing indoor plants that just keep going. So part of the greens come inside. So just while Neville's sharing his screen with us, thank you very much for the opportunity. I know probably having trees are absolute passion of mine. I know they are of Neville's, and having some greenery, there are so many beneficial or benefits to having trees and canopy cover that just absolutely, hopefully you'll get some information tonight that you'll be able to take home and just add, even if we have one backyard, every single backyard can add a couple of trees. What we can make a difference to the urban environment in 10 years time will just be absolutely amazing, and we have to start somewhere. So hopefully tonight will inspire you and get you involved to be able to grow something, whether it's a native tree, a deciduous tree, something that's suitable to your area. And once Neville and I can start, we've got huge information. We are absolutely passionate about urban canopy, and I'm one of the people that's just absolutely lucky enough being Director of Horticulture and Living Collections at Kings Park at the Botanic Gardens and Parks Authority, and taking on that incredible opportunity to be able to spread the horticultural world and horticultural advantages and inspiration across WA. I feel very privileged. So you'll hear a little bit more about arboriculture and what we do within Kings Park also. So we're just still waiting for Neville. Do you want me to just start and then we can?
I think if you can just start, that would be brilliant, Sue. Thank you.
Absolutely. So once what I will do is work through. I know Neville's got this amazing work that he's done with Green Space Alliance, and what Green Space Alliance is a group of people who are like-minded in the industry who have a shared goal to be able to value green spaces. And I think that's something in WA, you'll see some figures a little bit later on, but in WA we have been losing our tree canopy cover, particularly as we've had urban sprawl. Perth probably goes 160 kilometres from the north to the south, and City of Armidale's, we're lucky, they've got some incredible environments, got the hills, the scarp, the lower areas. So you've got this varied microclimate and still quite a lot of tree canopy. So why do we need street trees? That's something that I think we should start off with and say is very important. And I think that street trees are valued when we look at the places around the world and the areas around the world that are most valued. It's where we've got advanced trees and also established trees. We look at the green suburbs, and those ones with the trees and the shade make a huge difference. And once we start getting a tree canopy cover, providing that shade, it really cools our cities and our suburbs. And having those areas, the urban heat island effect is a real thing. If we can have urban heat island effect in Perth, where we've got all those hard surfaces and the reflected heat, if a couple of trees in our backyards or our front yards and then down our streets that really make a difference and keep that nice and cool, that's something that we can really make a difference. So that's one of the things, is keeping us cool. How many of us have understood how many or how high the temperature's been in the last, well, I want to say January, over so many days, 14 days over 40 degrees, and makes a difference, and really notice that difference. And I think we've got Nev there now, have we, Neville?
I think so, yes. I can see myself.
Great to see you. So I hope you could hear us when we were starting. We just started the importance of street trees, and we're going to talk about arboriculture and what we do at Kings Park. But that shade and that urban heat island effect that really makes a difference in our suburbs is definitely a real thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. It sort of came to hit me when I did, and I've talked about this in a future slide, but in Melbourne during the Black Saturday fires, a huge number of people were affected, 173 lives lost to the fire. But in the same city on that same weekend, there was nearly 400 lives lost to heat-related trauma. And that's a hidden affliction. We don't see those statistics, but they're very real. And the problem is particularly with the aged and young people as well. Babies going up to youngsters of 5 and 6. These are the two vulnerable parts of our community when we get excess heat. And you can see the effects of this around the suburbs. And one of the best ways of fixing it is definitely to have more trees. Interestingly enough, it's also having irrigated turf and gardens. And that's a bit of a sleeper. A lot of folks aren't aware of the importance of irrigated turf, particularly to cool our environment. So at one point, we tended to think that lawn was the enemy, that we had to reduce it to the absolute minimum. But now we're seeing that it has a profound effect on cooling the city and the suburbs. So when you see Langley Park in the middle of Perth, on the west side of the city, a big expanse of irrigated turf, that has a phenomenal cooling effect for the whole of the city. And we can bring this back to our own gardens very readily. And there's enormous benefit in having some green grass as opposed to that terrible plastic make-believe artificial lawn, which actually has the opposite effect. And here's a terrifying thought for you. The most dangerous place for someone over 60 on a hot summer's day is at the local bowling club if they have artificial turf and there's no cover. So a real build-up of heat there. And that's one of the things that actually causes our street trees quite a bit of trauma as well, when they are positioned in a garden with artificial lawn. The temperature is at least 10 degrees and sometimes greater than ambient temperatures. So the roots are getting cooked for these young trees.
Yeah, they certainly are. It makes a huge difference. Nev, if we could put it as actually a full slide view, that'd be great. If we've got a chance. If I'll talk on the next suburb if we can. I know you've got the technical. I've got the easy job. I'm talking. You've got the if we can show it, so then we can actually see the whole view, and that will make a big difference and get the full screen for you. So everyone who's actually part of it, there you go. That's part of it. We can actually go on to slideshow. That'd be fantastic. And the other thing that many people don't realise. Oh, look at that. And we'll get back to that one. That's exactly what you were saying, the heat island effect. But bitumen preservation, it's actually research has shown us that the bitumen lasts longer when it's shaded by a canopy of trees. That's the most incredible bit. So it's actually helping infrastructure. People worry about tree roots lifting bitumen. But if they're planted correctly, the root system actually has a canopy that's allowed to cover, and also the root system can the preparation has been correct. The savings on the infrastructure costs for any local government areas, and we know how expensive or how much of our rates, isn't it, Nev? So how much of our rates goes into road preservation and actually redoing roads. And so even just as simple as your backyard, your paving, the areas that you've got in your own hard surfaces in your own backyard will last much longer if it's shaded and not exposed to that hot sun. And while we're getting the slide going, we were talking earlier about 14 days over 40 degrees in January, unprecedented, and exactly right. And so if we've got a canopy that absorbs it, makes an absolute huge difference. And of course, we need a habitat for our birds, don't we?
Indeed, and we've actually got a massive pecan tree in our backyard, which is a magnet for a couple of days in the year for Carnaby's cockatoo, which, as we're aware, is very much an endangered bird in our environment. And it's fascinating to see what happens there. The tree takes some 6 months for the fruits to actually form from the flowers and mature. And in the last weeks before the fruits are ready, small groups of cockatoos come in, and I'm sure there's some youngsters amongst them, and mum and dad are saying, okay, Dad, this is what a pecan smells like just before it's ripe. So on the day when they start to split and they're ready to eat, we could have 100, 150 cockatoos on one tree. It's a phenomenal sound, not to mention a phenomenal sight. And we do need to build trees into our environments to encourage birds. So I'm really lucky. I've got a big garden, and we've got about 30 trees on the block, all up. And I'm planting as many as I can, as quickly as I can. But it's fabulous to see the bird life that comes in all forms, from the predators right down to the seed eaters, the nectar eaters. It's just a fabulous opportunity to observe nature in our own garden, and really brought in by trees.
Yeah, it certainly is. And it's actually one thing for anyone who's participating in this webinar tonight is you mentioned the pecan, Nev. I know the macadamia. So it doesn't actually have to be, even though we advocate for native plants, it actually doesn't actually truly have to be. And many of those macadamia trees, also pecan trees, are a fantastic food source. And so if you've got those, value those. Hopefully you might be able to get 1 or 2 macadamias, 1 or 2 pecans, and makes a difference. And of course, just adding to the biodiversity of your backyard. So we've talked birds, having lizards and geckos, and the extra biodiversity is so important. And any cover that's going to shade the ground, add to the fungi, to the soil. We're going to feed the soil, and particularly the leaf litter that then turns into mulch helps improve our soil, Nev. Gets to that biodiversity, increasing biodiversity in the backyard. So often it's the creatures that we can't see also that are valued in our backyard. It's just so we really need to build a landscape resilience within our backyards and increase that landscape resilience with our changing climate. And if that can be by planting lots of different trees, lots of different shrubs also, but keeping that root system cool, we're going to build up the food source and get the right microbes in the soil, and we start to get a loop within our urban areas also.
Well, I've got a bit of a wild corner right up the front of the property, so it's nearest to the road, but there's a couple of Calathemnus or one-sided bottlebrush, which are probably 35, 40 years old, and they're almost at the point of collapse at the moment. So we don't venture into that part of the garden. But on the periphery of that, a couple of weeks ago, I saw for the first time ever a frilled lizard. What a thrill. Yeah, so really fabulous. And that certainly was making that wild area of the garden its haven. So it's fabulous to see when it happens.
Yeah, that biodiversity is so important. So think about that when you're looking at trees and also plants in the backyard. And when we think trees, we're thinking, and that's one thing we don't really talk about, Nev, a lot, is that people think massive trees. But having just small trees, a tree is a plant with a single trunk, and it's probably classified as that. So small trees, anything from 3 to 4 meters, 5 meters high. It's actually not that high. They're not that hard to manage, easy to manage, and a small tree makes a huge difference to gardens, and particularly for local government areas for public amenity. Having some shade, Nev, I know we talk about shading pathways also. And if we can get the paths shaded with the importance of public open space in any local government, in any area, can never be underestimated, and have quality shade. If you're going in an area, often it's a bit hot on a day, but if you can have a pathway, it encourages people to be active. It encourages everyone to be out and about. And if you've got shaded paths, bit like we talked earlier about increasing or lengthening the life of our infrastructure. Same with pathways also. So I know when I'm going out and about and it's hot with young family, when the kids are little, even when I'm a little bit older, is to select the path of least resistance, select the shady path to get somewhere, and that's more enticing than if it's in full hot sun and glaring reflected heat.
Absolutely. Now, I in terms of enhancing biodiversity, had some interesting conversations along this line, where West Australian native trees, in the main, are pollinated by a range of animals. It can be birds, it can be bees, native bees, even some of the small marsupials get in on the act. And this is in stark contrast to deciduous European trees, which are almost exclusively wind pollinated. So having a wind pollinated plant or tree in your garden doesn't bring anything like the life that a tree that is pollinated by animals or insects does. So it's quite a big contrast, and it's a particularly potent reason for hanging on to some of our real old trees, the ones that have been around for a couple of hundred years, and our jarras and our marries very much in this space, and their ability to bring in an incredible array of life is quite special, and something that we need to be aware of.
Certainly do. Now, we've got so many benefits, Nev, here of the trees. I thought maybe we'll go through them fairly quickly, maybe give them sort of ideas, because I know you've got some fantastic stats talking about the benefit of trees, and maybe when we get to the selection, and also I'm sure we've got lots of questions to answer also. So they just are good. They're cool, aren't they? They colourful flowers and foliage. I think when we're selecting plants, we can really select things that have got fantastic flowers. We can choose something that so you've got interest in your garden all year round. And I think having flowers, there's the winter flowering plants and the summer flowering ones. And then, of course, spring, you're actually adding to biodiversity, adding to interest all year round. But also, you've just got something in flower, some life, even on the hottest weather, the coolest weather, there's something there. And never discount the benefits or probably the value of foliage when it comes to trees also, or plants. Think of them as the extra. So when there's no flowers, you've got this incredible interest in foliage. And I think if we can have the different colour of greens and shades of green, it also makes it really interesting as far as benefits go. Of course, they trap so much dust, don't they? You've got this roaring easterly wind. I know anyone who lives in City of Armidale will be very familiar with the roaring easterly winds, which I do where I live in the hills also. But just getting rid of that dust, trapping dust makes a huge difference. So they also trap any chemicals, any pollution. Many trees grow in the most polluted of areas also. So often you'll find if they can trap that dust, we start to reduce allergies, having those little microclimates that are protected also when it comes to garden. And then, of course, you know, where are the highest property values, Nev? Usually where the trees are, aren't they?
Yes, and there is statistics on having a tree in your front garden adding thousands of dollars to the value of your property. Strangely enough, having a tree in the backyard didn't do the same thing. I couldn't quite work it out, but anyway, that's the way statistics go. But you know, fancy coming home to a view like that in late winter. Actually, these start flowering about July. That's the indica or name will come.
Erythrina.
Erythrina.
Yeah.
Yes, beautiful. So,
yeah.
But to me, the big value is that shade on your house if you can arrange that.
Yeah, certainly. And then we start to look at water sensitive urban design and reducing stormwater. And I know there's a lot of work going into correct design for collecting stormwater and allowing it to infiltrate where it's actually fallen, so we don't get this massive runoff and erosion. And so if we can have these lovely swales within public open space, also within streetscapes, in the middle of streets where we've got trees planted, it benefits the trees, it benefits the urban forest, and we start to get that canopy. So all the other benefits we've talked about, if we can keep the water where it's actually fallen and we're not getting any pollution, that's filtering and going back to our shallow aquifers. And I know one of the most important things is capturing the water where it falls. So anything that you can do, whether there's space where there's no hard surfaces, anything you can do to capture the water within that area where it's fallen only benefits the environment, but it certainly benefits the trees too. And also works as a natural filter for those high nitrogen loads that might be and when any water runoff also. And then once we start to do that, there's been a lot of talk about storing carbon also, Nev, and if we can, as much carbon can be stored within the environment also, it's just only going to benefit our the world we live in for the future.
Absolutely, and there are folks around that are saying, okay, if you plant X number of trees and everyone on the planet does it, we can reverse climate change in a very short number of decades, which is great news. The other thing about storing carbon is that the roots of plants are phenomenally successful at doing this. In trees, it's mostly in the trunk, but in shrubs, ground covers, grass, it's in the roots, and this can have an amazing ability to suck up the carbon dioxide in the air and convert it into carbon in the soil, which is where it should be. So our problems really are not that we've got too much carbon, but we've got too much carbon up in the air and not enough in the soil. So if we can turn that around, and there's quite a few movements afoot across the country to turn that carbon back into the soil, sequester it there, and that will have a massive effect on our climate in the long term.
Yeah, it certainly does. And I think that we've all got a role to play in that. That climate action and that climate change is just so important. We've got an obligation, but also a want and a need to make a difference. And I think we can definitely make a big difference to what's around the place. And the other thing about it is, and I know where you grew up, Nev, there's some beautiful trees around. Where I grew up was where the salmon gums were. And to me, that says the tree of the area. So really, you look at the areas and think, oh, particularly like there's suburbs in Perth that are known for certain trees. So that local identity is something so important, and that pride of where you live and that sense of place, and really makes you connected to the area, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yes, I agree. And then we've certainly talked a little bit about heat-related illnesses, but if you can walk down an avenue like this one, it's incredibly cool and enjoyable. I've got two trees out the back of my garden. One is the pecan I mentioned, and the other one is an Erythrina indica or flame tree, and that they are the coolest spots in the garden. No matter how high the temperature gets, you can go down there. There's grass underfoot and these beautiful shady trees above, and it is cool on any day of the year. So it certainly makes you feel better. You actually feel more relaxed, and it's certainly good for the physical being as well.
Yeah, and it's that making you feel better. We mentioned that that's improving the mental health, mental well-being, reconnecting kids with nature. Also, Nev, I think that's so important. Something that we do at Kings Park often is allowing kids to run around through the Rio Tinto nature play at Kings Park. What that does, allowing people to discover, or kids and also parents and grandparents, to discover the importance of nature and what you can do. But how exciting it is to be able to climb a tree, to be able to really feel the bark of a tree, understand texture and leaves and different colours, and what we can do with those trees are just such a fantastic source of play. So allowing children to be part of that, something really exciting. So that leads us to, Nev, and I'm sure everyone who's watching will be very excited. Well, that's it. People is exposure to sun, and that's something that UV, even when it's cool, on a cool day, the UV is very high still. So if you can hop from shade to shade, that definitely is going to benefit all of us in the long term. So and that leads us to whether do we plant, there's some beautiful crepe myrtles there, Neville. Do we plant exotic plants or do we plant native plants? And both of us have favourites of both native and exotic, Nev.
Yeah, well, my thinking there in putting that topic up was native versus exotic. There's no fight going on here.
No,
there's
not at all.
There's plants for every location, and you don't have to be slavishly following growing West Australian natives, and you don't have to be slavishly following growing South African beauties. You know, there are so many plants around the world, and so many here. We've got one of the richest treasure chests of plants on the whole planet. So there are plenty to choose from, and that makes for an exciting possibility in my book. There are so many to look at.
Yeah, there's certainly. Oh, that's and see the Banksia menziesii, one of our iconic West Australian Banksia species that are just absolutely superb, grow in certain conditions. So I often say that there's a plant for every occasion, depending on where you are and what you want to do, because many of our native plants don't do brilliantly in shady positions, say some of the trees, but then some of our narrow natives do, some of the narrow deciduous trees do. So it does depend, Nev, what sort of look of garden you're looking for. Of course, we can still get over native plants, also exotic plants. There are many water-wise plants for that, and that's something that we do do probably need to mention at the same time is the criteria being water-wise for our West Australian climate. As much as we have irrigated green spaces also, we still water them efficiently, and it's about being efficient with that water and making best use of that water that's going to benefit the environment, benefit us, and benefit our local area where we live also. So, and I think our next slide has got a beautiful picture of a deciduous, is that a prunus? Yes. There? Prunus, stunning.
That one's Cercis siliquestrum.
So Judas tree.
Judas tree, yes.
Yes, yes.
Quite a stunner, and a nice small tree as well. It just shows you can get a lot of colour out of a small space with the right selection of trees.
Yeah, certainly can, which then leads you to, do you have evergreen versus deciduous versus monsoonally deciduous? Now, I know you're a fan of monsoonally deciduous, and if you can explain that, that's actually as our climate warms, as we start to get more humid weather, it's a focus of where we might be heading.
Yes, so we do need to look further north in Western Australia to choose plants that can handle more heat. Monsoonally deciduous plants, essentially things like a jacaranda, which loses its leaves around about September, October, and then bursts into flower in November on leafless branches. So there's quite a few plants in this category, and they just lap up the heat. So we've got a poinciana tree, Delonyx, in our garden, and while quite a number of some of the deciduous trees around it were looking a bit crook this summer, the poinciana just went from green to green. They really lap up even the most extreme heat. So we do need to think about choices with that increasing heat as part of the makeup of our choices.
Yes, we certainly do. And I know deciduous, and we haven't mentioned deciduous a lot, but just adding that leaf litter that goes back into the soil and improves the soil is so important also. So really, as we build up that humus in the soil, take advantage of those leaves. I often say, don't think that deciduous trees drop too many leaves, because those leaves break down very quickly and go back to feed the soil, particularly if you've got a really good base of soil, lots of organic matter. It won't be long and those leaves will definitely be broken down. So what are the best choices? I think the best choices are what suits your environment, where you are. Is it exposed and hot? Do you want to create a West Australian native garden? Do you want to plant some Eastern States trees? Are you looking for deciduous trees to let the winter sun in? And it's actually allowing our house to dictate what we want to do. Have you got a window that's going to the hot westerly sun's going to come in and cause a problem? So maybe a deciduous tree is perfect for that. So it lets that winter sun in and blocks out that hot afternoon sun, and particularly leaves it with that heat. We talked about urban heat island effect. And do you think, Nev, that the heat is the greatest threat to urban livability in the 21st century? I'd actually think it might be.
Well, it certainly gets my vote. And when you see a sea of roofs, as in that slide there, that's a very hot suburb. You need to spend a lot of energy to cool homes in that sort of environment, and plants can be a great help, trees in particular, to shade some part of our house or our living area, certainly make it a lot more livable. And yeah, so I'm definitely a fan.
Yeah, exactly. I think so too. And I know you mentioned, and it's worth going through again before we get on to the next and think about your trees, and I know City Armadale, very aware of the threat of fires as well. That Black Saturday in Melbourne, 173 lives lost to fire, and at the same time, in the same city, there was 374 lives lost to heat-related trauma. And I think that's something that it's pretty sobering, isn't it? Sobering fact that if we can plant the correct varieties of plants, have a landscape, a resilient landscape to heat, and create these microclimates within our urban areas, and also our outlying areas, our semi-rural areas, makes a huge difference also, Nev. So where's our backyard disappeared to? I know the biodiversity is starting to disappear, but I'm really interested to know this stat that you've got here.
Well, it is an estimate, but some reliability to it at least. So over a million, almost everyone you talk to, and I mentioned this too, says, yeah, well, I've got one of those at home. So these are bedrooms that aren't used, and we've lost those square metres from our backyard. So that used to be where we played cricket, where we grew veggies, where we had barbecues, and it's an area that's disappearing very rapidly. You can see it from the 1990s. A lot of the designs started to change then. So we've lost a lump of land, and it's turned into a bedroom in many instances, which we don't use. So what's the solution there? Well, I've got a extreme idea there, and that is to turn that unused bedroom into the food growing hub of the family. And with today's technology, with lighting and that sort of thing, it's very possible to do that. So there's my dream.
I look forward to that. Yeah, someone might be visiting you with an extra electricity use too, Nev, just quietly.
Well, I tell you what, with the modern UV lighting, LED lighting, that's not so much of a problem.
Yeah,
so technology's coming along.
It certainly is, and there was a really great article if anyone's interested in that. Someone's growing food choices commercially out of a container. So that's the company that's growing food inside. So when we're talking trees and selection, and many of our viewers in the future now and in the future will be wondering what's the best choice, and we mentioned earlier, we really do need to plant for the future. And just a couple of things that I'd like to, which adds another layer of complexity onto a never-ending selection of trees, is the biosecurity. And once we start looking at our trees, just think about varieties that might plant for 20 years' time. What were you thinking? So planting for your children and your grandchildren, what could go and what could potentially cope with a warming climate and potentially be suited to an area. One of the things that I'd just like to highlight at the moment, Nev, is the Polyphagus shuttle borer. That's an incursion that we've never had in Australia before. We're lucky. Western Australia is the first state to have this shuttle borer, and you can just see by the image there how small the little hole is to know that you'll see this little borer. And actually we've got reproductive hosts and non-reproductive hosts, but how it works actually is there's fusarium fungus that goes in behind its ears, and what the borer is doing is farming this fusarium. It's farming this fungus to eat it. So it actually moves it around within the tree, and so the tree can host that fungus, and so then the borer moves around and uses it as a food source. So there are species that are susceptible to that. Armidale is out of the quarantine area for that, so just keep an eye on that, and I'm sure you'll hear a lot more information about that through the local government, and keep your eye on what's happening. And then the other one is keeping an eye out, which you'll hear, is myrtle rust. So there's a couple of things that are around the place. Don't be alarmed about them, but just know when you're planting the varieties what to look for the future. And also hopefully we've given some inspiration, Nev, to get advice. And probably my top 3 areas, and hopefully you agree, you can add to it as well, is listen to the local people. What's happening in your local area? Have a look around, talk to your neighbours. If there's a nice tree in a street, go out and say, hey, I love that tree. What is it? How long have you had it there? How easy is it to care for? Head to your local garden centre. There's some fantastic information around. And of course, I know City of Armidale, your local government, has got urban forest strategy, some fantastic lists of trees that are suitable to plant for different areas. So if this has whetted your appetite for more tree information, head to those local areas, take a walk down your street and see what inspires you to plant in your own backyard.
Well, I've been doing a bit of that lately, looking around particularly at some unusual varieties of frangipanis, and gosh, there's some fabulous stuff in gardens. And they certainly succeed very well here. So good advice, Sue. Have a look around. I find that if you approach a gardener and want to know something about a plant in their garden, they're invariably very happy to help you. At least that's been my experience. So
they always want to share information, don't they? I think that's important, sharing that information. I love it when someone says, oh, I love that tree, what is it? So sharing that, I think we've all got that love of nature within us and just want to share it around also. So should all the trees go within Perth, Nev, or in the metro area?
Well, we certainly have an enormous country. Australia, West Australia is a huge place. Whenever you go travelling, you seem to travel for hours and hours sometimes before finding places. So we've certainly got plenty of scope for planting. We live in the most urbanised environment in the world in Australia. So such huge concentrations in cities. And that's where we need to put our trees, basically, where people are. So that's been one of the moves that we've looked at. There are a number of vulnerabilities that we are finding with trees, and certainly those two diseases, the disease and the borer that Sue was mentioning earlier, some of the things that have to be added in. Also, there's climate susceptibility, which trees are going to be able to handle future heat. So studies have been done to come up with a vulnerability index. And so we're now in a position where we can make recommendations about the most appropriate trees to go into specific areas. Across the country, there's quite wide variations in the green cover that's around, and some areas do it a lot better than others, and the whole country now, as I see it, is looking very seriously at how we can improve that cover, because the need for canopy is particularly important in urban areas, but not any one of them, the whole lot of them, basically. So human beings have a fairly narrow range of temperatures and humidity levels that they can live comfortably within, and get outside of that and we're in trouble. And that's one of the reasons why major cities now are looking very seriously at these tree canopy exercises to lift the canopy percentages. And I think councils have done overall a fabulous job in driving this change. One of the areas that now needs to be looked at and taken on board is the private property. So trees on private property are something that isn't regulated, and we need to make trees more heroes in our urban environment. So that's the sort of thing that we're hoping to achieve by this talk tonight. Is a very good example.
Yeah, certainly it's one of my favourite places. Never, maybe a bit biased. And actually, while we're talking about canopy and hard spaces, if you've got any questions, I think we've got a few minutes at the end to take questions. So type them in, and I think Nadine is going to collate those, and we can just answer those as we go. So those questions that that area, well, that bridge within Kings Park, that's actually one of the, within the WA Botanic Garden, one of the spaces where it treads lightly on the ground. You actually are up in the tree canopy and you can actually appreciate the tree canopy. And I think that's one of the things that we really need to give people access to be able to appreciate these trees and understand how important it is also. Now, Nev, I think we've got some slides about usage. Is that right? The next one is actually what's actually happening within our areas and local government areas. I think we've we've increased, well, we've got lots of loss, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. And I think what we've found in certain areas that it varies within local governments, but everyone, like you said, does have a huge role to play. But we have seen some increases also, haven't we?
Absolutely, and things are certainly moving in the right direction. And I guess the fact that we're now within local government, particularly, so highly aware of the need to get canopy going, it's concentrated a lot of effort into tree planting, but also maintaining the trees that we've got. So there is a lot of positives coming through with that. This heat map just shows you how hot areas are developing around where we live, and it's not just the central city, but the suburbs as well. So it's where we live that, to my mind, the greatest need to cool the environment is all about. So, and you can see there on the map some of the major not even sub-regional, just a sort of outlier suburbs are really starting to heat up very quickly, and there's lots of work to do there.
Yeah, it certainly is. And if you overlay that slide with the known vegetation and the loss in that area, yep, you actually see where that, as an overlay, you actually see where most of those houses are in that slide earlier that you talked about with roofs to roofs. We've got opportunities to change it, Nev, that's for sure. So it isn't all bad news. I think there's some good news on the next slide, and just having that effect and really being aware of it, I think we're going to make a huge difference for the future, that's for sure. So there is, it is within City of Armidale. I see that the 46% of the City of Armidale area is the second highest cover amongst LGAs. So they're actually on top of it and really made a huge difference having some of the outlying areas, and also some of the older suburbs. We really retained the biodiversity and increased 13% in increasing canopy cover, and grass, good to see that, also 6%. So there has been areas, has been some real difference made with the urban tree or the urban forest strategy that has been adopted by City of Armidale.
Well, Armidale has certainly been a real early starter in this area of urban forestry. One of the first councils to form a policy and to get things moving. So that is great work and well done.
Yeah, it certainly is. Certainly is. We find that there's just some little bit of stats there. I think seeing a difference with that, what's the most vulnerable and the least vulnerable areas to live. And if we've got trees, the top urban greening opportunities, City of Belmont, City of Kwinana, so that those areas. But I know City of Armidale has definitely made a huge difference. So, which probably leads us to Nev, the last 5 minutes. I think we've got an opportunity to give us a snapshot, but also to ask any questions that we've got, or answer, I should say, any questions that have come through within the last hour. And hopefully it's been inspiring to maybe zip out this weekend. Do you think, Nev, plant another tree?
At least.
2, I think, then.
Yeah, great idea. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So have we got any questions come through?
We have. So I'll just read them out for you if you like. So one question came through about when is the best time to water. Richard heard that it's probably better to water at midday, and that way the water would get through to every part of the tree. So yeah, so when's the best time to water your trees?
I think as early in the morning as you can. I think the ideal time, from what I've read, is straight after sunrise, because plants then start to wake up and get growing quite quickly. And at that time of the day, temperatures are relatively low, or at their lowest usually for the day. So it means that you get less evaporation of that applied water. Middle of the day, I would only ever do if you can see a tree is in some sort of stress, and trees tend to be a lot slower reacting than turf, for example. So you can see a blue streak in turf, and that says that it's wilting, and you can give it a drink straight away in the middle of the day. But that's really the only time I would suggest giving your tree or your plants a drink is when they're really stressed on a hot day. Best to get in early. If you know that you're going to have a 40 plus degree day, get up early and give your plants a real good drink to try and lift their moisture status to get them through the day.
Okay, thank you, Neville. What about, we've got a question about whether or not fruit trees should be planted on council verges to create an edible urban forest. And if you do sort of agree that that's a good way to go, what trees would you suggest would be suitable?
I think yes.
You go.
Yeah,
Sue.
definitely. I think that actually any trees are beneficial. Deciduous, we get nectarines and peaches and apricots. They grow fast. They produce fruit. That if we can manage the pests that come with them, that's okay. But citrus trees also. So yeah, definitely. I think any canopy cover is fantastic, only beneficial. Creates a shared neighbourhood. It creates a spot to stop and think. If we can get people to improve the soil, look after the trees, it only benefits the whole environment, the whole community. So I think so. It depends on what we're looking at. But I often say every house needs a lemon tree, a mandarin tree. Kids coming home from school can pick a few mandarins. Also mulberries, figs, anything that's going to give edible fruit for not a lot of care. Mulberries are fantastic value. Figs are just as good. And like I mentioned before, peaches and nectarines, particularly in those cooler areas, absolutely go for it, I say.
Yep, well, I agree with that. And I just threw in olives, with beautiful, attractive trees. And of course, you get the fruit as well. So great value, very tough plants.
Thank you. I've got a few other questions, so I'll keep going. On a 448 square metre block, what is a small non-deciduous tree that doesn't have a large root coverage? What do you suggest?
Well, there are many to look at, and as soon as we say one, we've sort of blotted out all the others. So there are, so it's a small block. You're looking for a small tree.
One of my favourites, Nev, is Hakea lorena. You can't go wrong with a pincushion Hakea. I know it's a native one, but it's still one of my favourite ones because it flowers in autumn. The birds love it. It's non-invasive by any means. The root system doesn't cause a problem, but of course then there's many fruit trees. Cercis was one that you talked about earlier. Nav is a fantastic tree also.
Yep, lovely small tree. So there is lots to choose from, and probably you need to go a bit deeper into what you're really looking for, what season of the year that you want to get flower, what colour flower you want, if that's what you're after, or what colour foliage. So the list is huge, and I'd encourage you to put down what you want and then go searching for it with those various criteria, because there's definitely something to fit your garden.
And another question is, how do we learn to best position trees to maximise the benefits for the ecosystem, such as Neville's comment about the Carnaby cockatoos?
Position them. Well, I think get them into your garden is the first thing to do. In terms of positioning them on the block, I don't think that makes a huge difference to the animals around there. It's really a matter of having them more than where they occur in your on your block of land.
Here's another question from Alison. I've been fortunate enough to grow a red flowering gum tree from seed. It's now 40 centimetres high. What is the best height to plant it, and how do I best prepare the soil to ensure successful planting?
Sue, this is you.
This is me. Red flowering gum is one of my Corymbia fussifolia is one of my favourite plants also. So 40 centimetres from seed, coming up to autumn planting time at Kings Park. We're going to be planting all our trees within the next April and May. So 40 centimetres is a great height to start. Get it in this winter. The soil's still warm in May, so anytime from now on, really keep that water, allow that water to soak into the soil. So depending where you live, hole, if you can dig it 40 centimetres deep by the same wide, discard the very base of that soil, put some little bit of soil improver or compost in there, and not very much at all. Mix that with the existing soil and some controlled release fertilizer, and then those plants will just absolutely take off. And you'll find that by this time next year, it'll be probably 1.5 meters high if it's looked after, and it'll just go crazy. Now, a little tip when it comes to red flowering gums is usually the darkest mid-range, the darkest, most scrawniest leaf usually ends up as the most beautiful, darkest colour flower. Usually the ones that are really strong leaves usually end up with a light colour. So if you're looking for a really deep red and it's not a particular grafted variety, look for the scrawniest, darkest leaf plant, and then you'll get the best colour flowers.
Thank you,
And
Sue.
it is great value to plant them young. 40 centimetres is a terrific size. Once they start to get 2 and 3 metres high, there's a problem there with the root system tending to get wrapped around the pot. So get them young and stick them in as early as you can, and they barely know that they've been moved.
Somebody's asked about a list of Armadelle's recommended trees, so we'll be able to find that for you, and we'll make sure that we email all the attendees tonight, so we can share that list with you. This is a question about developer clearing guidelines. How do we encourage developers when they're developing housing estates and they totally decimate the land and then turn around and plant a few token plane trees? So I guess they're asking how can we make developers plant more trees, I think is the question.
I think that's in the local planning strategy and guidelines, and I think that's specific to developments, but also specific to the guidelines within the local government. And I think local government's getting better at that, and really setting those guidelines, those rules, what we need to do, what's considered as a landscape that's non-negotiable. So is it a native remnant landscape that should be there? Is it a natural habitat, or is it being planted? I think it's just valuing nature, valuing those trees, and I can see a change. It's probably, without putting it back to the local government, it's lobbying your local government, lobbying your councillors and saying this is valuable, this is what the residents want within this area.
And our state planning authority now have actually included the need for a tree, for deep soil within every housing unit development. In other words, each unit of a house, or each house, has to have some deep soil suitable for planting a tree. And that's very new legislation that's going through, and that will come down to or through the councils. So even at state planning level, there is recognition that we need to have trees in urban environments, home by home.
Great, thank you, Neville. Here's another question, just really about how people are living in apartments now. And do LGAs provide advice for trees appropriate? I think basically what they're saying is, can you have a tree on your balcony in a container, and does that help? Does that contribute to the urban forest?
Yes, 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 and yes. Even more, anything, absolutely. You'll find anything that's going to contribute to the urban forest, definitely. So large pot, large tree, deciduous, small fruit tree, a lemon tree, a native tree, Hakias do brilliantly. I mentioned those earlier. I've got some grafted red flowering gums in pots. They're fantastic. Magnolias in pots, large containers, they definitely make a difference. So just because you've got a small area, that's one thing we really didn't talk about today, but just because you've got a small area, definitely you'll find don't let that be an excuse. Anything that's going to cover in green will benefit any area.
And there's some developments now happening around the world where apartment blocks have balconies with trees planted as part of the landscape. So a couple of famous examples, one in Milan, where there's an absolute forest surrounding this apartment block. And we're seeing that development all around the world. We haven't seen a lot of it in Western Australia yet, so I'm really hanging out for the day when we start to get green buildings going here.
We will soon.
Yep. We've got green roofs starting to happen in the city, so I'm encouraged.
Well done, Nev.
Well, there's no other questions that have come through. This is your last chance, people, if you would like to ask a question. Here's one. One of my street trees is a Kings Park special. Why is it named a Kings Park special?
I can tell you that. So in 1980, it was developed. It was a callistemon that was developed actually at Kings Park. One of the first species of cultivars that were bred in Kings Park. So that's why it was called that. And yeah, it's 1980, I think it was first developed. Nev probably will remember when it was first developed, but that's when it's a fantastic. You remember, Nev?
No, I don't remember, but I've got a heap of them on the property. I love them.
Yeah, they the colour is absolutely amazing. The foliage is good, strong growers, and still a well-regarded plant.
Yep.
Oh, hang on. Here's one. This is a little bit off the track, but we've got a question. If you wanted to get working in urban or landscape design, what would be the best way to get started as a job?
I'm actually passionate about training people, and Nev, I know, has been in the industry also for a long time. Horticulture is a fantastic career, so depends what you're wanting to do, but I studied agriculture, then horticulture, and then landscape architecture. So depending on what level you want to go in, at Kings Park we run a trainee program, so each year we have an intake of trainees. We are always looking in our industry, overall the nursery and gardening industry, to have people who absolutely love what they do, are passionate about the plants, passionate about people and the environment, and there's a space for anyone who's like that. And so I often say don't be put off by the hard jobs to start with, because you'll find it's actually a lifestyle, and you'll find that it really, it's one career, and I never made huge inroads into it, but it's one career where you can say you make a difference to people's lives, and I really love that.
And from my perspective, it's an area where you're doing something that you love, so it means that you've never worked a day in your life. It's just all joy. And that certainly is the case.
When it's 42 degrees and you have to water all day. No, that's true. That is so true, Nev. It's sort of we do get joy in it. So TAFE run, there's traineeships. There's a lot of traineeships around. Probably the intake of those is always at the beginning of the year, but also TAFE, see what the local TAFE has got. Head down to your local garden centre or production nursery. And I actually started in the industry by driving trucks. That's how I got into the industry, driving delivery truck. Never was born into it. So only down the road in Armidale, in City of Armidale, wasn't it, Nev?
Gosnells, actually.
Gosnells, okay. Oh, well, that's fair enough. Yeah.
Had lots of messages of thank you for such a wonderful session, and so I think we can probably close off if you guys, unless you wanted to say anything else, Neville and Sue. We're so thankful that you come on board and that you shared all your knowledge. It's been brilliant.
Okay, well, look, it's been a great pleasure. It's the first time I've ever been involved in one of these exercises. So we had a few technical problems early on, but it's great that it all worked out, and thanks for listening.
Yeah, and I can just reiterate that to say it's been a long time coming, because I know it's been cancelled. So well done to City of Armidale for persisting and making it happen. And now you've done it once, you've got a huge opportunity to really get the message out there. So thanks so much for the opportunity, and hopefully we've inspired a few people to plant a few more trees also.
Looks that way. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thank you so much for your time, and enjoy the weekend.